Okay, now we're officially recording, so I will go back to screen sharing. And keep going. But what I was saying was, Kim, I was asking Brian a little bit, but Kim and Haley, can you just tell me a little bit about like how much experience do you feel like you have with digital accessibility at this point? Or like what comes to your mind when you think of digital accessibility?
We have zero.
Okay, okay, great. That's
We don't,
perfect.
because we don't actually ever generate um, any flyers or anything like that up here. So
Okay, okay, that's good. Perfect. I just like to know where people are starting from. Um, so the first thing that I think is important to talk through is our why. Why digital access? And what digital access is it's actually a set of practices that is meant to remove barriers for people with disabilities who are trying to access our materials, our content, our spaces, any of those things. So I think one of our biggest whys is that it helps us to be more inclusive and reach as many people as possible in the Learning Commons. And some interesting things to note are when we're talking about digital access, a lot of times people think of like vision and screen readers. We'll be talking about that, but we're also talking about things related to hearing and cognition and mobility. And when we create materials that are accessible for more people, everyone benefits. It makes it more user friendly and intuitive. And one of the other reasons that it's good to do it now is we're rebranding in the Learning Commons. We're getting a new name. And so a lot of our marketing materials, a lot of our resources are going to need to be recreated and redesigned. So it's just a good time to do it. There's also legal requirements. So we want to ensure that students have equal access, equal ability to succeed. We're a community college. We want to be as accessible to as many people as possible in general as part of our purpose. But it's also good to remember that there is a legal aspect to it. And it's not just students that benefit. Faculty and staff can participate better when we're more accessible. I think it's helpful sometimes, like some of you might have personal experience with this and coming up against barriers with accessibility, but I think it's also helpful to think about like, when is the last time that you were trying to do work and your Wi-Fi went out? Or have you ever had the experience where your phone stopped working? Maybe you dropped it into, I won't say what kind of water, but dropped it into water, or it just, the battery ran down and got older. And that feeling, when you want to get things done, you need to access information, and there are just things in the way of that. That's a similar feeling to when there isn't the ability to access materials easily. So usually one of two things will happen. We'll either have to spend our time trying to get through those obstacles rather than focusing on the task or getting things done, or we'll just kind of give up because, well, can't do that. And so yeah, if you think about that feeling, that's what it's like when people try to use and access our materials and resources, and they aren't as accessible as they could be. Okay, so the other thing, so even though digital accessibility is pretty huge and can feel like it can be hard to know where to start, it's a continuous process. So when we're learning different things, it's just important to not feel overwhelmed or discouraged if you don't know everything, because even as like we were researching this topic and hearing people's kind of testimonials about what things being more accessible had done for them, people were saying even the small changes that you make, like if you make small changes to how you're doing things now, it makes a major difference for people. So just know that, like, if you take one or two things away from our presentation today and try to do it differently, you're making a major difference for people. and it's good. You'll keep going on, and as you learn more, you add to it. We love, things that are one and done and instantaneous. I love those kinds of things too, but this is more of a process. But be encouraged that whatever you do, whatever you put in place is really going to be helpful to the students and the people that you serve. And one of the principles too is it's really easier. The reason we're trying to get this to you before you start creating documents is we can go back. Like, we definitely can go back, revise things, make them more accessible. That can be important to do. But if we start with this in mind, it's really easier to create than it is to remediate. So we want you to have these principles and tips and things like that, so that you're starting out, you have in your mind as you're creating documents, flyers, materials, you have access as a part of your framework for doing that. So how can we begin with access in mind? And we're going to start by having Linsey share some basic design principles that you can think about when you are trying to create materials. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and send it over to her.
Okay. Just move my buttons around here for a minute. Okay. So I'm going to go over some design principles because I've found that there is some overlap between designing for aesthetics and designing for accessibility. So if you're able to make an aesthetically pleasing flyer or a document, you can also kind of check off some of those accessibility boxes along the way. Anyway, okay, so design principles. I'm going to cover three main areas: hierarchy, layout, and then cohesion. So let's get started. Hierarchy. This is when you're looking at your flyer, you're getting started. Before you've done anything, you want to look at what is the most important piece of information that you want to get across to your reader. And then once you've determined what that is, you want to draw the viewer's eye to that part on your flyer. So if you're making a workshop, the title of your workshop is probably what you want most featured, most emphasized, followed by maybe the date, time, location, things like that. Other things you might have on your flyer is a description or registration information, but you want to pick what is the most important thing I want them to focus on. And that's where you want to start when you're choosing your layout and the style choices you make. So once you've determined your hierarchy, you want to use size, color, font, and location to help create a design that mirrors that hierarchy. So size definitely is going to have a huge impact. So if you see here, you're going to read the biggest part first, and then you're going to read the smaller font next. Another thing that's going to stand out is the color. So bright colors, high contrast, those are the things that are going to stand out to your reader next. So you'll see the yellow font next when you're looking at it. The thing you want to stay away from is using large font and bold for everything, because now you've lost what your emphasis is, right? So when you're picking what's most important, you really have to think both what is most important that I want to tell the user, but also what's important to your user, what's important to your audience. If they're interested in the title of your workshop, they're probably going to already go and look for when is it happening, where is it happening, how do I register? But if they don't know what your title is because it's too small, then they might just walk by, right? They're not going to keep looking at your flyer. So you want to just use your different features for emphasis in a way that is most strategic. So don't make everything bold, because now nothing is emphasized, right? So something that has been found using eye tracking technology is that if a document is mostly text, people tend to scan it. If it's a lot of text, they're not going to read all of the text from top to bottom, right? They're going to scan it in this F pattern. If it's a more visual document like websites, flyers with pictures on it, they're going to read it in this Z pattern. That's how they're going to scan your document. So if you have a heading at the top, if you have a footer at the bottom, they'll probably catch it when they're doing the Z pattern of scanning your document. but it's kind of just something to think about when you're doing your layout, right? I mean, you don't have to make sure you follow an F line when you're making a design or follow a Z line, but it's just something to be aware of, that no one's going to read all the words on your page. They're going to scan it. So you want to help make your document in a way that they can quickly scan for the information they're looking for. Okay, so in talking about layout, let's move on to some information about layout and white space. I'm kind of going to use this flyer as an example as we talk about this subject. So white space is not necessarily just the white on the page. It's just the negative space of your design. So in this case, that light yellow color in the background is the main white space, but there's also, you know, the green background in the math circle is the white space behind the images, or the negative space. White space is super important. When you're looking at this flyer, the way you end up with this aesthetically pleasing design, and the way that it's scannable, readable, someone can quickly see what it's about, is because you have a lot of white space around your text, around your images. So white space is both the space between the letters, it's the space between the lines of text, and then it's the space around the images as well. This is super important because if you have a sufficient amount of white space, not only can somebody read it easily, they can also scan it quickly to find the information they're looking for. It also can add emphasis to various areas. So because there's a lot of white space around the date and location on the bottom of the flyer there, you're able to easily see it. It stands out to you as an element. There's a lot of white space at the top as well, so you can quickly see the title. In general, if you have a lot of white space, it's also going to be aesthetically pleasing. It's going to look professional. You have to fight the temptation to want to keep filling up that space, because all they have here really is free tutoring. They have a time, a day, a location, and they say, go to the website for more information. It's tempting because you have this extra space at the top you want to put in there, like new offerings, or you want to say, you know, don't forget we have in-person, we have hybrid. You're wanting to put something in all those little spaces because we want to tell our audience so much, but you have to fight the temptation. Just get them in the door, get them to visit your website for more information. Because if it's a lot of text, they're not going to read it. They're going to pass it by. They might not even see it's for tutoring because they're just seeing a bunch of words and they're going to keep going. So you got to just be strategic, pick very little text when possible. Okay, moving on. So balance and layout is the next thing we want to talk about. If you're new to design, having a symmetrical design is a simpler way to go about it. It's a little trickier to pull off an asymmetrical design and have it be aesthetically pleasing and functional. So if you're doing a design that has both text and images, something to think about is large images or a large amount of text are heavy parts of your design, whereas small pieces are light. So if it's symmetrical, it's easy, right? Because you want some heavy stuff on the left, some heavy stuff on the right. If you're doing asymmetrical, it's a little trickier, but you can see they still kind of have on the left side of the page this heavy square at the top, and they're balancing it by having this heavy circle at the bottom. So it's kind of got some heavy weight at the top, some at the bottom, some on the left, some on the right. So aesthetically, it still looks appealing. If they had all those images at the top, it would feel like, well, why didn't they use the space at the bottom, right? And it would feel just not aesthetically pleasing, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so it's tricky to pull this aesthetically pleasing asymmetrical type thing off. If you're doing symmetrical, focus on using your alignment tools in like Microsoft Word or Publisher, whatever you're using. You can align all your items on the left side or align them all on the right. But in general, this is going to make your document functional. People are going to be able to quickly read it. It's also going to look nice. Okay. Oh, I'm going too fast. There we go. So the next thing we're going to talk about is cohesion or unity. You want to have consistency in all the elements of your design. So there should be some unison. So you want to do that through color, font, and style. Okay, so color, you want to try to use only 3 colors, which is tough because you want it to be beautiful. You want the whole rainbow, but if you have too many colors, it's hard to read. It's hard to focus on what you're supposed to see. So you want to choose just 3 colors if you can. I like to use like 1 color for the heading, 1 color for the body, and then maybe a 3rd color for the footer or something like that. Or a 3rd color to maybe emphasize something you want to highlight. So if you need more colors, like if you choose, say, orange, blue, and yellow, you can choose the different shades of orange, and that's still considered 1 color. So it can help if you want to have, you know, a background that's light orange and bright blue text somewhere else. Like it's okay to use different hues, but try to focus on just 3 colors when you're designing. That's going to help you have the most success. If you have photos in your image, in your design, or a cartoon or something like that, what I like to do to try to make it flow between my pictures and my text is to choose colors that are in the graphic. So use your little eyedropper tool and try to choose a color. So if you have a picture of a beautiful grassy field and a red barn or something, then maybe choose text that's red and green text as well, because it'll help your image flow with your text and it'll make a nice professional looking design. The next thing you want to focus on is your font. Try to choose only 3 fonts. I really try to choose only 2, and you try to make them different. So you don't want 2 very decorative swirly fonts with, a lot of decoration, or 2 cursive fonts, because they're going to look very difficult to read if it's cursive or decorative. But also aesthetically, it's a lot to look at, right? So you want to choose maybe 1 decorative font if you need to, and then choose some more simple fonts to go with it. But in general, I should just stick away from the decorative fonts just because it's hard to read. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to talk about in regards to cohesion is just choosing images that are similar. So if you're making a flyer and you choose a photograph, maybe other images should also be a photograph with people or something. Otherwise, choose all cartoons or choose all icons. Something you can do also to make your pictures go together is to change the color slightly. So maybe you found a bunch of icons you want to use in an infographic. You have maybe, a computer and a little person image and things like that. You could change the color of them so they all match. Just kind of a simple thing to kind of make them all look the same. Or if you're choosing icons, maybe you have a 3D computer and you have a 2D pencil. Try to find some that are both the same. When you're looking for images, try to find all 2D shapes or all 3D, just to help have some cohesion in your design. Okay, the last thing I'm going to cover is just don't forget your contact information, because you want to make sure they know how to get to you, where they can get more information. So always include your department, the Learning Commons, and College of DuPage. I like to just throw it in the footer, makes it easy. Always include a website, a room number, and a phone number. You can include an email if that's necessary, but at least have those things so that people know where to find you. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Linsey. So in addition to the design principles that Linsey shared about, the other thing that we wanted to go over is an acronym to hopefully help you remember some of the basic accessibility principles that we're talking about today. And this was created through the Worcestershire, I'm going to pronounce it funny, the Worcestershire City Council or something like that in the UK, and was adopted by the University of Aberdeen and some organizations in the United States. And it just is a good, helpful structure to kind of remember some basic accessibility principles. So Bridget's going to talk us through what the acronym means, and then we'll talk a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And thank you, Lindsay, for covering all those design principles, which I think are really helpful when thinking about accessibility. This SCULPT acronym, I think, is particularly helpful when thinking about accessibility from the lens of accessibility for people with disabilities, particularly people with visual impairments, but even people with learning disabilities as well. So SCULPT gives you a place to start from if you're thinking about, you're just trying to figure out where to start when it comes to accessibility. So we have structure, to think about use of headings in particular, but some other structural things, how you're using color and contrast, how you're using images, links, the use of plain language, and then how we're structuring tables. So Jenny's going to start us off with structure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, goodness. Hang on one second. Okay. So our S in SCULPT, our first letter, stands for structure, and it's referring to headings. And you might look at the text on the right and be like, Jenny, you're doing a presentation on accessibility. This block of text is not accessible at all. And you are correct, and it's not meant to be. What I want you to do, it's too small, it's a lot of things, but what I want you to do is just kind of look at it for a second, take it in, and think about how you normally feel. Maybe you're a student or have been recently, and you read a textbook and you see this big block of text, or you have a coworker or a random relative who sends you that email that's like 5 paragraphs long, or a text or something like that. So when we talk about structure, what we're talking about is organizing our content, our text, in a way that's really clear and readable, and potentially making smaller chunks of text, but then giving it headings as well. So it's more like this idea. It kind of calms me down to look at this over the block of text that we were looking at before. So when you're making a document, one way to make it accessible is to create headings at different levels. So it's almost like a book. Like heading 1 would be like the title of the book, and then you would have heading 2 as the chapter, or like subsections for heading 3. You don't have to necessarily go to all of those levels, but just to separate it and organize it so it's easy to read. And the cool thing about screen readers is if we use the built-in headings in the programs that we use, like Microsoft Word, Google Docs, things like that, the screen reader can do what we do, basically kind of skip over things, read what the main parts of the document are, so the person can then go back and like kind of choose which information to go over, or it just breaks it up in a way that makes it more understandable and less confusing. But it's important to create headings using the program's kind of built-in function. So I'll show you Word and Google Docs. But one of the main things, as we've been talking about accessibility, that comes up a lot is some of these programs are really set up where if you use the functions that are already built in, it's set up to be accessible. So it makes it easier for you. You just kind of need to know where to find things. So I'm going to share a document with you. That's right here. And this is actually our accessibility statement that we have on the website. And so we definitely wanted to make sure, we want to make sure everything is accessible, but we wanted to make sure our accessibility statement was accessible. And so one of the ways to do that was through the use of headings. You find the built-in headings in Word by going to your Home tab here and going to the Styles menu. So it's right here. And generally, you're going to start with heading 1. So you would click on heading 1. And then if you had another heading underneath, so this is the main title, College of DuPage Learning Commons Accessibility Statement, but then we have our introduction. So that's our level 2 heading. If we scroll down, we have our accessibility commitments. That's also a level 2 heading. We have campus resources. So this one doesn't go beyond heading 1 or 2, but this is where you find it. And the interesting thing is sometimes when you bring it up, it'll only show heading 1 or 2, but once you hit the next level of heading, it'll give you additional ones after that. So it'll automatically give you the option of heading 3. You can, or heading 4 or whatever you need to. So you can expand the styles and have a list this way. You can do it that way. But the main thing to remember is for Word, it's that home tab, it's the styles menu, and it's whatever, you know, the starting heading is. If you click on those, you can either do it after you complete your text, or you can do it from the beginning where you like hit your heading, fill in your title, or you can just do it all and then go make your headings afterwards, whichever you like better. Now, you might say, as you look at this, I don't love how that looks. Like this is the way that it's set up in the system, but I would rather have my heading centered. I would rather have less space between it or whatever. You're not stuck with having it the way that it looks in Word if you want to change it. So actually what we did for the final version of the accessibility statement was we did change it. We changed the color, we made it centered, we did all that, but it's still the built-in headings. And the way that you do that is you would go to the heading that you want. It's going to try to change it back for me, but you right click on that heading. And I sometimes with my touchpad, I was trying it this morning, have trouble with right clicking and it doesn't come up. But basically, let me see if I can do it with the other one, but otherwise I will just tell you what it is you're supposed to do. Okay, it's not going to right click for me. When you right click, a list will drop down and you click the word modify. And when you click modify, it brings up all of your options with fonts, with bold, with spacing, with all of those things. And so you can change it to look the way that you want. And I apologize that that is not working. But that is how you would do it. You just right click on the heading that you're on. You can modify it to look however you want. But that is how you create headings in your Word document. The other thing to notice for like built-in things is in Word, they really encourage you to use like their bullet functions, their numbering functions that are already there rather than like doing your own thing, like putting dashes next to it or tabs or spaces. When you use their built-in bullets and numbering with lists, then that also makes it easier for the screen reader to use. So I will just show you one more thing. So in Google Docs, how we do this, did it switch? Can you see this marathon training plan or did it not? It didn't? Okay. I will stop sharing. And then, okay. So I have this basic marathon training plan here that doesn't, look very easy to read. It's because I am running a marathon, so I'm trying to figure out what training I need to do. But to give you a sense of how to use the headings here, so if my marathon training plan was my heading 1, I would go next to the font here where it says normal text. See, it's styled as well, just like in Word. And I would make marathon training my heading 1. I could make my 8 weeks of base training heading 2. And then I also have my 14 weeks of marathon training. Oh, makes me want to not do it. And you switch that to heading 2 as well. And then you can do the built-in bullets. If I wanted to do a bullet next to run 4 days, walk 2 days, you could do the built-in numbering next to those things. So just to show you the different programs and the heading structures. Headings are huge for accessibility. And when you go through, if you use an accessibility checker, which I'll talk through at the end, a lot of times in a document, headings are what is going to come up. So if you have that in mind from the beginning, that can be really helpful. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint. And Bridget's going to talk about what the C stands for in Sculpt.
Yes, so the C in Sculpt stands for color and contrast. I know Linsey covered a bit about color and contrast, but I want to mention a few other things. So as she mentioned, it's really important to use colors and backgrounds that create a high level of contrast. And I think it's pretty obvious that, using a white background with black text or black background with white text creates a high level of contrast. But I just want to note that, just because you are prioritizing high contrast, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to stick with black and white, or, it has to be boring. If you notice from this image, medium blue against a white background, or this, I guess maybe a more royal blue, or even against a black background, creates a high level of contrast too. So what you want to avoid typically are the more pastel colors and more muted, again, particularly with a more muted colored text. So in general, bright solid colors are going to create more contrast than those more muted colors or pastels. You also, like, another good rule of thumb is to think about the color wheel, from elementary school art class. So colors that are more similar to each other on the color wheel, so red and orange, those two together do not create a high level of contrast, where something like blue and an orange on the opposite sides of the color wheel are going to create more contrast. So that gives you some general guidelines to think about when trying to create a high level of contrast for optimal visibility. The other thing to think about too is to avoid text on busy backgrounds as much as possible. And then if you're not sure about the level of contrast when creating a document or a flyer, there are a number of tools available online that allow you to analyze the contrast. And there's also an extension for your computer that you can download. That's a really, once you download it, it's easy to just click on a selection of text or a portion of your background and put it into this contrast checker, and it'll let you know if you have a high level of contrast or a low level. And that's something that we can share with you over email at the end of this presentation. We're going to provide some resources and links at the end of this or after this presentation. So yeah, so then next, something else we want to consider, we're kind of grouping it with color and contrast, but it's really not. It's just thinking about style choices. So since color and contrast are an element of that, we also want to include font style choices, and relate that to that category. So Linsey again talked a little bit about fonts, but I want to share a few more specific guidelines. So when thinking about font types to use, just be aware of the difference between serif versus sans serif fonts. So if you're not familiar, serif fonts are those with the little decorative or like small, I wouldn't say decorative, but like small strokes at the end of the longer strokes, a particular letter. So Times New Roman wouldn't be an example of serif font. Sometimes they're referred to as little feet on the letters. So if you notice, Times New Roman has the little feet at the end of the strokes, whereas Helvetica is considered a sans serif font because it does not have those little feet. So in general, sans serif fonts are considered to be more accessible than serif fonts, but that doesn't necessarily mean serif fonts are inaccessible. You can use those. Times New Roman is a popular font for a reason. It is considered to be very readable. But in general, just you want to avoid those overly complex fonts or overly decorative fonts like Linsey mentioned. You also want to avoid any fonts that have narrow in the name, so Arial narrow. That's going to be much more difficult to read. And again, avoiding those overly complex fonts. So in general, some of the most accessible fonts, I just wanted to provide a few examples. Arial, Calibri, Helvetica, Tahoma, Verdana, and obviously Times New Roman too, but there are more. But if you're just, looking for a starting place, those are considered to be some of the most accessible. I also want to mention too, use of all caps. That's okay to do on a limited basis. As you see, I've done it here for my heading. You just don't want to use all caps for large portions of text. It really makes your text more difficult to read. And then I wanted to mention that, and reinforce the idea of limiting to 2 different font styles. I know Linsey said 3. When we're looking at like things like Word documents, you want to try to limit to more like 2. And then guidelines for accessibility when it comes to font size, they're pretty straightforward. Using a minimum of 12-point font for documents, and I know that sounds like a standard that most people are aware of, but you'd be surprised when people are trying to fit in a lot of content in one page. Oftentimes 11 or 10.5 font are used. I know that might be a little different for flyers and things, but when you're looking at when you're producing just like documents, looking at the use of Word, you want to use a minimum of 12-point font. And then for PowerPoint, a minimum of 24-point. I also wanted to note here, oh, thank you, Brian, for the reminder. So Brian mentioned to help remember sans means without in French, and and serif comes from the Dutch for dash or line. Thank you. So I have an example here of 24-point Arial font and 28-point Arial font. Just remember that 24-point when it comes to PowerPoint is a minimum. So keep in mind your audience and your method of presentation. So if you were presenting to a large audience who's, some have to view the screen from a far distance, you really want to think about going with a larger font for maximum visibility, whereas 24 might be totally okay for a Zoom presentation where people have closer access to the screen. Okay, so next we want to talk about use of images. So our U in Sculpt. When considering placement of images, or how you're going to use them, it is really important to prioritize purposeful images that enhance your message. But the other key piece that we want to focus on today is the use of alternative text or alt text. When you're using images in any kind of document, flyer, or presentation. So what is it, alt text? It's a brief description of the appearance or function of an image, and it's read aloud by screen readers. And screen readers, as many of you may know, are often used by people with visual impairments to read aloud the content of their screen. But alt text can also be helpful for the typical user as well. So if an image won't load and alt text is provided, it will be available if for some reason an image won't load. Then Google and other search engines also pull alt text to index images, and so it helps make it easier to find information. And then in terms of general guidelines for creating alt text, you want to use somewhere or limit your alt text to somewhere between 100 and 125 characters. Some really complex images may require more characters than that, but know that some programs may cut you off after, I believe, 150 characters or so. So in general, the rule of thumb is, somewhere between 100 and 125 characters for an alt text description. And you want to provide alt text for all non-decorative images. So sometimes you may want to use an image for decorative purposes only, just to make something more aesthetically appealing, and that's okay. I know I talk about purposeful images, but occasionally, I think occasional use of decorative images is fine. You just need to mark them as such, when you're indicating images that have alt text and when you're indicating images that are purely decorative. And I'll show you how to do that. So as long as you mark it as decorative in the program you're using, the screen reader will notice that. So it'll, so the user will understand, oh, this is not conveying meaning, it's just a decorative image. So my example here has the alt text below it of a tan dog laying in the grass with its mouth hanging open and its tongue hanging out. So it's descriptive, but brief. And another example here to show kind of the difference between what you want and what you don't necessarily want in an alt text description. In the first example, we have a man wearing a helmet riding a bicycle. So again, it's brief, but conveys the essential elements. The second example, a bicycle, really doesn't provide much information. And when you look at the focus of the image, the man stands out more than anything. So if by just noting a bicycle, you're really missing part of the essential information. Then the last thing I want to note about alt text is you don't want to include picture of or image of in your alt text description. So yeah, it's a no-no here to say image of someone riding a bicycle. The reason for that is screen readers will automatically note when coming across an image where alt text is provided to say, you know, or to indicate to the user it's an image or a picture of something. So to someone using a screen reader, if you put in image of or picture of, it's going to say an image of someone riding a bicycle. It's going to make it even more confusing. So just the description itself is what is needed. And then Jenny, if you want to stop sharing for a second, I will show you all how to create alt text and how to edit. So looking at the example I just showed you, what you want to do to add alt text is once you've added an image, if you right click on the image, does that come up? Are you all able to see what comes up when I right click? Okay. So if you click on view alt text, my alt text is already there. Man wearing a helmet, riding a bicycle. I put that in, but yeah, so you include you enter your alt text there. Another option would be to, when I click view alt text, well, it still appears there, generate alt text for me. You can have alt text generated. Now, it's important to review the alt text that's generated because this just says a person riding a bicycle. I think it's okay, but the other one was a little bit more descriptive. So you would mark, you know, if you decided to use that, just make sure to click approve alt text. The other thing, remember I mentioned earlier, certain images, if they're purely decorative, here's where you click to mark that so that a screen reader will note that appropriately. And note that it's, you know, only for decorative purposes and the user is not missing any essential information. The same goes for Word, or it's very similar. So I'm gonna just show you in Word real quick how to add alt text. So again, so you've got that dog image from earlier. If you right click, go to view alt text, and then you can enter your brief alt text description. And in this case, if I generate alt text, it says a dog lying in the grass. So here, I think the description used earlier, a tan dog lying in the grass with its tongue hanging out, provides a little more information that might be more useful. So the auto-generated ones may not always be the best, but it gives you a place to start from. And then the other way you can also enter alt text is from the review tab. And if you click check, if you, sec, gotta move my ribbon down. Click on check the little, why is it not working for me? Yeah, you can review. Here we go. You want to click on that little arrow. There we go. So check or select the alt text option here, and then that also brings you back to alt text. So that is how you enter alt text. Any questions about alt text? Okay. Then, if not, I want to move into creating accessible links. And for a few participants, if you are able, I would love to know just kind of your background when it comes to writing accessible hyperlinks or including accessible hyperlinks. So I have 3 examples here, and if you were able to just type in the chat, which of these 3 do you think is most accessible? Oh, Kim said that she didn't know about the alt text feature. Well, cool. Yeah, I'm glad you, yeah, now you know. So for these 3 examples, we have the same sentence. Here's the link to the poor principles image, referring to another acronym for accessibility, which we won't get into today, but it refers to the image below. But if you have a chance to type in the chat, which of these 3 links do you think is or would be considered the most accessible link? And I won't call on you. I'm just gonna just to love to know which one you think is most accessible. 1, 2, or 3. Maybe everyone got a little occupied, but that's okay. Okay. Got 1 response. 3. So we have 3 question mark, and we have 1 that says number 1. So actually, number 3 is considered to be the most accessible link, and I'm going to talk about some guidelines that will help to explain why. So in order for a link to be accessible, they should make sense out of context. So if a link says, click here to find information on X, Y, and Z, if you pull click here out of context, you really don't have much information about where the link is taking you to. Whereas that 3rd example, the poor principles image was the actual portion link. You take out poor principles image out of context from that sentence, you still have an indication of where what that link will take you to. Text links should also be underlined in a different color than the main text. A lot of times that'll happen automatically, but don't like change that when writing emails, or if for some reason your formatting gets screwed up. Text links should always be underlined in a different color. So these guidelines make it ensure that links will be properly read by a screen reader for those visual users who might be visually impaired. And then if you're using an image as a link, make sure the destination is included in your alt text tag. So I have some additional examples. So as I mentioned earlier, some unclear hyperlink examples would be just to say, like, click here for instructions on how to use something. So anything with just click here, again, those first 2 examples show that. And the 3rd one, story 1 and story 2, there's the essential information, but the link is actually included in the read more. So again, when read by a screen reader, that actually makes it more confusing. And then the last one, Accessibility 101 with register next to it. On the next page, I'll show you, or on the next slide, I'll show you a better example. So for some accessible hyperlink examples, the first one, instructions for the new COD website are available online. The key component that's actually linked, instructions for the new COD website. That's where the document leads to. It's very descriptive, and we're not including the entire link. I think that example came in that first slide. Again, that just makes it more complicated for screen readers. Again, very descriptive where the link is leading to. Learn more about accessibility in terms of accessible contrast and color coding for accessibility. And then this last one, just a better example of a better example compared to the last one. If someone needed to register for some type of workshop, Accessibility 101 and 102, the link is actually contained in that portion of the text, Accessibility 101 and 102. So, any questions about accessible and inaccessible links? I know this has taken practice for me over time, because I used to be a click here, person, and I still make those mistakes sometimes too, but I'm trying to get better about my descriptive links.
Okay, the P in Sculpt is for plain language. This might be the easiest to remember, and it just means, well, it might be the easiest to remember if you're someone who likes to use plain language. Sometimes we're more like descriptive and flowery and whatever in the way that we talk, and that's okay. But one accessibility principle is to really be like straightforward in how you talk and share information. So plain language, a lot of times you can think about it in terms of like writing at a 6th to 8th grade reading level, really understandable, active voice, just saying what you mean, getting to the point quickly, those kinds of things. But keep your audience in mind too, because if you're writing something to the Board of Trustees at COD, that might look different than if you're making something for elementary school kids. So keep that in mind. But that's just kind of a general rule of thumb as you're thinking through how to express what you want to say in materials. Straight to the point, direct, concrete. Say what you want to say as fast as you can, so it's really understandable and people know what you're getting at. Left justify is more for documents, like that makes it easier to read. If you left justify, if you're doing flyers and stuff, you can center things. It doesn't mean you can't, but it's just for readability. And then Linsey was talking earlier about doing things to emphasize the most important parts of what you want people to know, so that's true here too. We will make sure that you have this link to this website, plainlanguage.gov. It has some really helpful examples and guidelines if you ever want to kind of check and see like what would it look like, is what I'm saying, am I saying it plainly, if you need any help figuring that out. So plain language is P. And then our final letter in Sculpt is T. It stands for table structure. So tables, screen readers have a notoriously hard time with tables. And honestly, like if there are other ways to convey data, that would be helpful to do. But if you do need to use tables, there are some good accessibility principles for that. So I'm going to show you what that might look like. Okay, one of the main things is as simple as you can keep it. Like if you're going to do tables, just using simple instead of the really complex tables with tables inside tables and stuff like that. It's great to keep it simple. Here is an example of a more accessible kind of table. And the things to keep in mind are that it's really important for the screen reader to make sure that you have the heading identified, the header line identified as the header line. I'll show you how to do that in a second, but you want to have the headers identified. And then to not, I'll show you what I mean by this, to not use any split or merge cells. I wasn't sure what that meant. Maybe you know more than I do, but basically what that means is like all of the cells up here are, there are 5 across, there are 4 down, they're not the same width, but they're basically all in the same columns. When you split and merge cells, so merging is kind of like this, like there are 5 cells across, but here on spring break, we merge that all into one cell. The screen reader is gonna have a really hard time with that. There are 5 cells down, but here in assignment, they split the cell so that it's like 2. So it's like 6 in this row and then a merge cell here. And it just makes it really hard for the screen reader to read. So no split and merge cells, keep it as simple as possible. Identify your header row. And if you can put a caption or an identification of what it is at the top. So it says class schedule there, so that's an identifier. I'm going down here. This is just the very not pretty table, just so I can show you how you navigate around here. But you can also, it helps to have a caption too, so the screen reader can read what the table is about. So table 1, the schedule of class material and assignments for zoology 1100 is the caption. If you click into a table, it brings up some new options up here in terms of table design and layout. To create your header, you want to make sure that this, under table design, that your header row is clicked. So that's the important thing to do for headers. And then in terms of layout, if you have a big table and your table might go onto more than one page, you can click repeat header rows, and that will ensure on every page that the screen reader can read those headers. So tables can be a little bit more complicated, but just wanted you to have an idea of basic idea of how to try to structure them so that they're accessible with a screen reader. And then that is our SCULPT acronym, but we were kind of like, what it doesn't include is what Bridget was showing you a little bit before, was the use of an accessibility checker. Because if you don't do anything else today, I hope you do. I hope that you take away some of these things that we're saying, not all of them, I know it's a lot, and try them. But if you don't do anything else, if you use the program's built-in accessibility checker, it will identify these things for you. So we wanted to make sure that you were aware of how that works. And what you do, like in Word, it's under the review column. Bridget was showing you a little bit already. You go to where it says check accessibility. If you click on the top, it brings on the side, oh good, no accessibility issues found. But if there were, it would list them there, and it would have a down arrow to kind of tell you how to fix the issues. Or you can look at specific aspects of it, like Bridget was talking about alt text, so we can look specifically at alt text if we needed to add that. If we wanted to look at this navigation pane, shows you the organization of your document so that you can see how the screen reader will read it, and if it makes sense, if like the visual order is the same as the reading order, and that all makes sense to people, or focus, or different things like that. So in PowerPoint, in Word, and any of those programs, using the accessibility checker, and if you put it on from the beginning, like it can even be helpful to not wait until the end to do it. It tells you as you go along. So that is something that we would definitely really recommend as well. Let me stop sharing. So those are the SCULPT principles, some basic design principles from Linsey, and we want to make sure as we're getting to the end here, that if you, I know we're past time, okay, but if you had any quick questions that you wanted to ask, we wanted to give the opportunity for that. So yeah, thank you for listening, and we're open to any of your questions. Oh, avoid using idioms. Thank you, Brian. For the plain language part, I didn't see that until now. That's really helpful. Okay, and if you don't have any questions, I just wanted you to know, I wanted to thank you again for attending. Yes, I know. I totally understand you're restricted. We appreciate you coming anyways. And I wanted to let you know that we will be, to make our presentation as accessible as possible, we're gonna send a copy of our PowerPoint that has the alt text, and we will be, we're recording, we'll upload to YouTube. We will we have a transcript available we will, if you would like that. And yeah, just thank you for coming, and feel free to be in. Oh, we also have a handout that we'll send out to everyone too, that has the SCULPT acronym and some specific ways of implementing it. So we'll send you some links and resources. But yeah, thanks again for coming. We appreciate it, and feel free to be in touch with us if you have questions afterwards.
Thank you all.
Thank you.